need to make these numbers work, Natalie. Investor confidence depends on it, my boss Brent Douglas said, sliding a folder across his mahogany desk. The fluorescent lights in his corner office buzzed overhead as I stared at the quarterly reports spread before me. My name is Natalie Serrano, and I had been a senior accountant at Glenforge Innovations here in Denver for 6 years. At 34, I thought I had seen everything in the corporate world, but nothing prepared me for what Brent was asking me to do that gray October afternoon. The company specialized in renewable energy consulting, and our reputation had been built on integrity and transparency. At least, that's what I believed until that moment. I don't understand what you mean by make them work, I said carefully, though the knot in my stomach told me I understood perfectly. The quarterly figures showed a significant loss in the third quarter, primarily due to 3 major contracts falling through and unexpected equipment failures at our wind farm projects. Brent leaned back in his leather chair, his expensive suit perfectly pressed despite the late hour. Come on, Natalie. You've been here long enough to know how these things go. We need to show growth, not decline. Our investors are expecting a 15% increase, and these numbers... He gestured dismissively at the reports. These won't cut it. I felt my heart race as I looked at the actual figures again. We were showing a 12% loss, not the 15% gain he wanted reported. Brent, these are the real numbers. I've triple-checked everything. The Westmont contract fell through in September, and the Colorado Springs project had those turbine issues that cost us nearly $2 million. Then find a way to reclassify those expenses, he said, his tone growing sharper. Move them to next quarter. Adjust the depreciation schedules. Do whatever you need to do. I don't care how you fix it, just fix it. The office felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in around me. Outside his window, I could see the Rocky Mountains in the distance, their peaks dusted with early snow. Those mountains had always reminded me why I loved working in Denver, but now they seemed like silent witnesses to what felt like a betrayal of everything I stood for. I can't do that, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. That would be fraudulent reporting. I could lose my license. Brent's expression darkened, and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. It wasn't surprise or disappointment. It was anger that I had dared to question him. That look told me this conversation was far from over. The tension in Brent's office was suffocating as he stared at me with barely concealed fury. I had worked for him for 3 years since he became the chief financial officer, and I thought I knew him well. He had always been demanding and results-oriented, but I had never seen this calculating coldness before. Natalie, I think you're misunderstanding the situation here, he said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. This isn't about fraud. This is about presenting our financial position in the most favorable light possible. It's what every company does. I shifted in my chair, feeling the weight of 6 years at Glenforge Innovations pressing down on me. I had started here as a junior accountant fresh out of graduate school, working my way up through dedication and long hours. I had genuinely believed in the company's mission of advancing renewable energy solutions. The irony wasn't lost on me that the company promoting clean energy was asking me to dirty their books. But these adjustments you're suggesting would misrepresent our actual financial position, I insisted. Moving expenses between quarters, manipulating depreciation schedules, that's not presenting things favorably, that's falsifying records. Brent stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the Denver skyline. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his office, and I noticed how the light seemed to avoid his face. You know, Natalie, I've been watching your work for a while now. You're technically competent, I'll give you that, but you lack the vision to see the bigger picture. The bigger picture? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear his answer. He turned back to me, his smile sharp and cold. The bigger picture is that Glenforge Innovations is on the verge of securing a $100 million investment from Peterson Capital. That investment will allow us to expand our operations, hire more people, and make a real impact on renewable energy adoption. But if we show a loss this quarter, Peterson walks away. I felt my mouth go dry. Peterson Capital was one of the largest green energy investment firms in the country. A partnership with them would indeed transform Glenforge Innovations, but not at the cost of financial fraud. That doesn't justify falsifying our reports, I said, though my voice sounded smaller than I intended. Brent's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. Think about it over the weekend, Natalie. Think about what's more important, your rigid interpretation of accounting principles, or the future of clean energy. We'll talk again on Monday. As I left his office, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. That weekend was the longest of my life. I sat in my apartment in the Highlands neighborhood, staring out at the city lights and wrestling with what Brent had asked me to do. My cat Phoenix seemed to sense my distress and stayed close, purring softly as I tried to make sense of the situation. I kept thinking about my father, Miguel, who had immigrated from Mexico with nothing but a fierce work ethic and an unwavering belief in doing the right thing. He had worked construction for 30 years, sending me to college with money earned through back-breaking labor and absolute honesty. "Mija," he used to tell me, "your reputation is the only thing no one can take from you unless you give it away." On Sunday evening, I made my decision. I would not falsify the reports, no matter what Brent threatened. But something in his demeanor on Friday had made me uneasy, so I decided to protect myself. I drove back to the office building, using my access card to enter after hours. The building was eerily quiet as I made my way to my cubicle on the 14th floor. For the next 3 hours, I methodically copied every document I could access related to our quarterly financials. Emails, spreadsheets, internal memos, budget projections. Everything. I encrypted the files and stored them on multiple external drives, then uploaded copies to a secure cloud storage account I created specifically for this purpose. Call it insurance, call it paranoia, but my instincts told me I would need proof of the company's actual financial position if things went badly. Monday morning arrived with a gray Denver sky that matched my mood. I dressed carefully in my navy blue suit, professional armor for what I suspected would be a battle. As I walked into the building, I noticed Brent's Porsche was already in the executive parking garage. He was clearly eager for our conversation. I had barely settled at my desk when his assistant, Victoria, appeared beside my cubicle. "Mr. Douglas wants to see you immediately," she said, her usually friendly demeanor replaced by cold professionalism. The way she said it, without her usual smile or small talk, told me that word of Friday's conversation had spread. As I walked toward Brent's office, I felt my colleagues' eyes on me. Some looked curious, others sympathetic, but most seemed eager to avoid being associated with whatever was happening. I had worked with these people for years, shared coffee breaks and celebrated promotions together, but now I felt completely alone. Brent's door was open, and I could see him sitting behind his desk with what looked like a prepared folder in front of him. His expression was calm, almost serene, which somehow made the situation feel more ominous than if he had been obviously angry. "Come in, Natalie," he said, his voice carrying an odd formality. "Close the door behind you. We have some things to discuss." I closed the door and took the chair across from Brent's desk, the same chair where I had sat on Friday when this nightmare began. The folder in front of him was labeled with my name, and I could see what looked like official letterhead beneath the cover. "I hope you used the weekend to reconsider our conversation," Brent said, folding his hands on his desk. His tone was casual, but there was steel underneath it. "Have you thought about what I asked you to do?" "I have," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "And I can't do what you're asking. I won't falsify financial reports, Brent. There has to be another way to handle the Peterson Capital situation." His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "I see. Well, that's unfortunate, but not entirely unexpected." He opened the folder and slid a document across the desk to me. "In that case, I'm afraid we need to discuss your future here at Glenforge Innovations." My heart sank as I looked at the document. It was a termination letter, already prepared and dated for today. The reason given was performance issues and failure to adapt to evolving business requirements. I felt a surge of anger at the vague language designed to protect the company from any wrongful termination claims. Performance issues? I said, unable to keep the indignation out of my voice. Brent, you know my performance has been exemplary. I've never had a negative review. That was before you demonstrated an inability to work collaboratively with management, he said smoothly. Your refusal to work with me on this project shows a concerning lack of team spirit. I stared at him, finally seeing him clearly for what he was. This wasn't about performance or team spirit. This was about eliminating anyone who might stand in the way of his fraudulent scheme. You're firing me because I won't commit fraud for you. Brent leaned back in his chair, his composure never wavering. I'm firing you because you're too naive for the real business world. Maybe accounting isn't for you, Natalie. Perhaps you should consider a career in education or nonprofit work, where your rigid moral standards might be more appreciated. The condescension in his voice was overwhelming, but it also crystallized something inside me. I wasn't just being fired. I was being dismissed as irrelevant, naive, and incompetent. After 6 years of dedicated service, he was treating me like a child who didn't understand how the adult world worked. I'll need you to clean out your desk and return your access card by the end of the day, he continued, consulting his watch as if my termination was just another appointment in his busy schedule. Victoria will escort you to your workspace and observe while you pack your personal items. I signed the termination papers because I had no choice, but as I wrote my name, I felt something shift inside me. Brent thought he was getting rid of a problem, but he had no idea what he had just unleashed. One more thing, he said as I stood to leave. You signed a non-disclosure agreement when you started here. I trust you remember the terms regarding confidential company information. The threat was clear, even wrapped in legal language. He was warning me to keep quiet about what I had seen and heard. I nodded silently, not trusting myself to speak without revealing the fury building inside me. As Victoria appeared at the door to escort me out, I took one last look at Brent. He had already turned his attention to his computer screen, dismissing me as if I had never existed. He thought this was over, but he was wrong. He had no idea that his worst nightmare was just beginning. The walk from Brent's office to my cubicle felt like a funeral march. Victoria walked beside me, her clipboard in hand and her expression carefully neutral. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues following us, but no one spoke. The entire floor seemed to hold its breath as news of my termination spread through the office grapevine. My cubicle looked exactly as I had left it on Friday. Family photos, my favorite coffee mug with the Colorado flag on it, the small succulent plant that had somehow survived 3 years of office fluorescent lighting. These personal touches that had made the space mine for 6 years now felt like artifacts from someone else's life. You have 1 hour to pack your personal belongings, Victoria said, consulting her clipboard. I'm required to observe to ensure no company property is taken. I nodded and began gathering my things, my mind racing even as my hands worked automatically. The encrypted files I had copied over the weekend were safely stored at home, but I needed to be careful not to give any indication that I had taken anything from the office. Victoria watched me with the intensity of a security guard, making notes on her clipboard about everything I put in the cardboard box. As I packed my desk drawer, I found the business card that Janet Rodriguez, a reporter from the Denver Business Journal, had given me 6 months ago. She had been writing an article about women in renewable energy finance and had interviewed several of us at Glenforge Innovations. At the time, I had been proud to represent the company in a positive light. Now, that business card felt like a lifeline. Personal effects only, Victoria reminded me as I hesitated over a stack of industry publications. Those belong to the company. Of course, I said, slipping Janet's business card into my pocket while Victoria was distracted by someone asking her a question. The move was subtle, natural, and completely unnoticed. My colleague Jessica appeared at my cubicle as I was packing the last of my personal items. She had started at Glenforge Innovations the same week as me 6 years ago, and we had become close friends. Her face was pale with shock and concern. "Natalie, what happened?" she whispered, glancing nervously at Victoria. "Everyone's saying you were fired, but that can't be right." I looked at her for a long moment, wanting desperately to tell her the truth, but knowing I couldn't. Not here, not with Victoria watching and listening to every word. "I disagreed with management about some accounting practices," I said carefully. "It seems they felt my position was no longer sustainable." Jessica's eyes widened with understanding. She was an accountant too, and she knew exactly what kind of disagreements could lead to sudden termination. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "This isn't right." "Thank you," I said, meaning it. It was comforting to know that at least one person saw through the company's narrative about performance issues. As I carried my box toward the elevator, I passed the conference room where the quarterly review meeting was scheduled for Thursday. Through the glass walls, I could see the presentation materials already set up, ready for Brent to present his falsified numbers to the board and potential investors. The sight made my stomach turn, but it also strengthened my resolve. By the time I reached the parking garage, I had made my decision. Brent thought he had silenced me with threats about non-disclosure agreements and professional reputation. He thought I would slink away quietly, grateful to avoid a public scandal. But he had underestimated me completely. As I drove home through the Denver traffic, I was already planning my next move. That evening, I sat in my apartment with the encrypted files spread across my laptop screen and Janet Rodriguez's business card in my hand. The weight of what I was about to do settled on my shoulders like a heavy blanket, but I knew there was no turning back. Brent had made his choice when he decided to fire me rather than abandon his fraudulent scheme. Now I would make mine. I called Janet's number, and she answered on the second ring. Denver Business Journal, Janet Rodriguez speaking. "Hi, Janet. This is Natalie Serrano. We met about 6 months ago when you interviewed me for your article about women in renewable energy finance." "Of course I remember you," Janet said, her voice warming with recognition. "You work at Glenforge Innovations. How are you?" "Actually, I worked at Glenforge Innovations. I was terminated today." I took a deep breath. "Janet, I have a story that I think you should hear. It involves financial fraud, investor deception, and a company that's about to betray everything it claims to stand for." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Those are serious allegations, Natalie. Are you sure you want to go on the record with something like this?" "I'm sure," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "But I need to know that you'll investigate this thoroughly." "I have documentation, but I want to make sure this story is bulletproof before it goes public." Janet's journalist instincts kicked in immediately. "Can you meet me tomorrow morning? There's a coffee shop called Highlands Coffee on 32nd Avenue. I can be there at 8 a.m. "I'll be there," I said. "And Janet, bring a photographer. I have a feeling this is going to be bigger than just one company's financial irregularities." After hanging up with Janet, I spent the rest of the evening organizing my evidence. The encrypted files contained everything Brent thought he had hidden. The real quarterly numbers, his emails discussing the need to massage the data, and most damning of all, a recorded voicemail he had left for his assistant discussing the Peterson Capital meeting and how the adjusted numbers would guarantee the investment. But as I reviewed the evidence, I realized that going to the press wasn't enough. Financial fraud was a federal crime, and if Brent was willing to fire me to hide his activities, he would probably try to destroy evidence and intimidate other employees once my story went public. I needed to involve law enforcement before he had a chance to cover his tracks. I researched the Securities and Exchange Commission's whistleblower program and found their online reporting portal. The process was more straightforward than I had expected, but the weight of what I was doing made my hands shake as I typed my report. This wasn't just about revenge or justice. I was potentially destroying careers, ending relationships, and exposing criminal activity that could send people to prison. But then I thought about the Peterson Capital investors, who would make decisions based on false information. I thought about the employees who might lose their jobs when the fraud eventually came to light anyway. I thought about my father's words about reputation and integrity. By midnight, I had submitted a detailed report to the SEC, complete with all the documentation I had gathered. The automated response told me that an investigator would review my submission and contact me within 72 hours. I fell asleep that night with my laptop still open, the screen glowing in the darkness like a beacon of hope. Brent thought Monday's confrontation had ended with his victory. He had no idea that it was just the beginning of his downfall. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made Denver feel alive with possibility. I met Janet Rodriguez at Highlands Coffee exactly at 8 a.m., carrying a folder that would change everything. The coffee shop was busy with the morning rush, but Janet had secured a corner table where we could talk privately. "Before we start," Janet said, setting up her digital recorder, "I want you to know that I've already done some preliminary research on Glenforge Innovations. There have been rumors in the industry about aggressive accounting practices, but nothing concrete enough to report." I slid the folder across the table to her. "Here's your concrete evidence." For the next 2 hours, I walked Janet through every document, every email, every piece of evidence that showed Brent's fraudulent scheme. Her expression grew more serious with each revelation, and I could see the journalist in her calculating the scope and impact of the story. "This is incredible," she said finally, looking up from the documents. "Natalie, you realize this could bring down the entire company? And probably several careers along with it?" "I realize that," I said quietly. "But what's the alternative? Let them defraud investors and continue operating on false pretenses? How many more people will get hurt if this continues?" Janet nodded, her respect for me evident in her expression. "You're right, of course. This story needs to be told." She paused, studying my face. "But I have to ask, are you prepared for the backlash? Brent Douglas isn't going to take this quietly, and he has resources to fight back." I thought about my father's words, about integrity and reputation. "I'm prepared," I said. "The truth needs to come out, whatever the consequences." Janet smiled and extended her hand. "Then let's make sure the truth gets told properly. I'll have this story ready for tomorrow's edition." Wednesday morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The Denver Business Journal had published Janet's article online at 6 a.m., and by 7 a.m., it was trending on social media. The headline read, "Glenforge Innovations CFO accused of investor fraud in whistleblower report." My phone rang again. It was Agent Patricia Wong from the SEC. "Miss Serrano, I'm calling about your whistleblower report. We've reviewed your evidence and we're opening a formal investigation. Can you meet with me this afternoon?" "Of course," I said, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and vindication. "There's something else," Agent Wong continued. "Based on the severity of your allegations and the strength of your documentation, we're coordinating with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. They'll be executing search warrants at Glenforge Innovations this morning." I nearly dropped my phone. "This morning?" "In about 2 hours," she said. "I wanted to give you advance notice because there's going to be significant media attention. Are you prepared for that?" Before I could answer, my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see news vans already gathering on my street. The story was bigger than even Janet had predicted. By 9 a.m., federal agents had descended on Glenforge Innovations. I watched the live coverage from my living room, seeing my former colleagues standing in confusion as FBI agents carried boxes of evidence out of the building. The cameras captured Brent being escorted from his office, his face pale, and his hands visibly shaking. The reporter on scene announced that the company's stock had been suspended from trading and that criminal charges were expected to be filed within days. Peterson Capital had already issued a statement withdrawing their investment offer and expressing their commitment to ethical business practices. It was over. Brent's carefully constructed fraud had collapsed in less than 72 hours. As I watched Brent's empire crumble on live television, I realized that justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about protecting others from the harm he would have caused. My father would have been proud. I had protected my reputation by refusing to compromise my integrity. And in doing so, I had probably saved countless investors from financial devastation. The road ahead would be challenging, with legal proceedings and career rebuilding to consider. But I had learned that sometimes the most difficult choice is also the most necessary one. Sometimes the only way forward is to burn down the very thing that's destroying you from within.